Fischer's attorney, Dwane Cates, has stood up for a long parade of clients over the years, many of them guilty as sin. But this case? This was different, said Mr. Cates.
Innocent people are the hardest to represent. I don't sleep at night representing innocent people because losing is not an option.
Here's how he put the question to the jury.
Ladies and gentlemen, this case is all about whose finger was on the gun at the night that Lee Ratter died. You know, Rob didn't have any motive to shoot Lee, and Lee certainly had some reasons to commit suicide.
Wait, he did have some reason to commit suicide? Yes, said Rob's attorney. This time Lee's life was spinning out of control.
There's no money coming in, and Lee doesn't know what he's going to do.
Lee's friends had no idea how bad it was, said Cates. Tens of thousands in loans and unpaid credit cards, $15,000 to the IRS, another $25,000 still owed to a former employer.
No doubt that we, had some financial troubles ahead of us.
Belinda was a state witness, but she told the jury that Lee, with his $100,000 life insurance policy, would joke aloud he was worth more to her dead than alive.
He would say that numerous times over his life.
Then, that night, December 30th. Do you remember? Lee got an email just after dinner, excused himself from the table to call his business partner. That partner admitted that when Lee called him after getting that email, he was not happy.
And how was he acting?
So he was kind of upset.
Good reason. This man is from the company IGT, with which Lee was hoping to make that multi-million-dollar deal. And he testified, there never was a deal.
Did you tell him no?
Yes, I need somebody who has distribution centers worldwide. Doesn't help IGT at all to enter into that business, so he was told no, that was not going to happen.
What's more, he said, any future deals would be small, in the tens of thousands, not in the millions.
This wasn't a murder, ladies and gentlemen. This was a tragedy. Lee Ratter's worth more dead than alive. He knew it. For some reason, he couldn't bring himself to tell his partners and his friends that this big deal wasn't coming.
No, not murder, said the defense. This was suicide. Their theory? After that long night of drinking vodka at the kitchen table with Lee, Rob passed out. But Lee kept right on drinking. And drunk and discouraged, he went and found Rob's gun, turned it on himself, pulled the trigger, and when Rob awoke to the sound of a gunshot, he was totally confused. He assumed he must have been in bed, when in reality he was probably right at the kitchen table with Lee or very close by.
Imagine, you're still drunk. There's somebody laying on the floor in a puddle of blood with a gun in their hand, and you look down, you're in your pajamas, you're barefoot, and you're standing in the hall facing away from your bedroom. Wouldn't your first thought be, geez, I must have been in bed?
The defense called this doctor, an expert in alcohol abuse, to explain some of Rob's strange behavior.
In my opinion, to a reasonable degree of medical certainty, he was in a blackout. He was confused, he was not oriented to time, he made some kind of what might be unusual or confusing request to the police officers.
Around the time of the 911 call, Rob's blood was 3 times over the legal limit, which certainly explained not recognizing Lee, said the expert. As for the big deal the state made about Rob washing his hands when the officer told him not to,
have you ever told a drunk friend to do something? It's kind of like herding cats.
I know, but he's a lawyer and an ex-cop.
Right, he's an extremely drunk lawyer and ex-cop.
But what about that blood evidence? The state's expert told the jury the law of gravity dictated the gun should have dropped out of Lee's hand as soon as he fired a bullet into his head. But the defense's medical expert produced statistics showing that guns actually remain in the hands of suicide victims 25% of the time.
Have you ever seen the gun stay in the hand of somebody that committed suicide?
Yes, sir.
And, well, the state's blood spatter expert was certain the body had been moved. The defense called their own blood spatter expert, who told the jury the opposite.
My opinion is that this is a self-inflicted gunshot wound.
Finally, said defense attorney Cates, the case came down to one crucial question. Whose finger was on the trigger? Cates put the question to the state's crime analyst.
You at least said you couldn't exclude Mr. Ratter, correct?
That's correct.
And that's because there were portions of this print that matched portions of Mr. Ratter's print.
There was, yes.
And the one person whose prints did not match was Rob Fischer. Conclusion?
His fingerprints weren't on the gun. His DNA wasn't on the gun.
Mm-hmm.
And Lee's was. They didn't find any fingerprints that matched Rob Fischer anywhere on the gun.
Well, what did that say to you?
Lee was the last one that handled the gun.
After several weeks of testimony, the case went to the jury. Both sides expected a quick verdict.
I thought they'd be back in a couple hours with a not guilty verdict.
So it was something of a surprise when the jury stayed out for a whole day, and then 2, and then 3.
I want the world to know that my brother did not commit suicide, and that it was a travesty for somebody to even say that he did.
Please be seated.
And then?
Have you reached a verdict?
Yes, we have, ma'am.
We, the jury, find the defendant as to count 1, second-degree murder, guilty.
And just like that, Rob Fischer was facing 10 to 25 years in prison. His lawyer has filed a motion for a new trial.
I was in shock. I was shocked. I really was. I truly believe my client to be innocent.
Lee Ratter's family sat in the courtroom, quietly sobbing.
I don't want to think about him. I want to think about my son and justice for my son. I'd do anything to bring him back.
And Belinda? Belinda's heart breaks, she said, for her stepdad, Rob.
And this is, a double tragedy all the way around.
But mostly it's Lee she thinks about. Lee and the children growing up now without him.
The hardest part is knowing that they won't have anybody to walk them down the aisle. He won't be there to see that. I feel pain for myself, but my biggest source of pain is for them.
And as for what happened in the early hours of December 30th, 2010, maybe someone knows, and maybe not.
That's all for this edition of Dateline. I'm Lester Holt. For all of us at NBC News, good night.